Okay. An important reason for government intervention is externalities, which are the positive or negative effects of economic activities on unrelated third parties. Let's talk about examples of externalities. For an instance, pollution is a negative externality that requires government regulation to mitigate its impact. Market failures occur due to externalities, and the externalities consist of negative and positive externalities. When externalities arise, the free market doesn't allocate resources efficiently. Pollution is a negative externality that affects people who aren't involved in the polluting activity. This also brings about dispute between countries. The government intervenes by imposing regulations and taxes to reduce pollution. Education, on the other hand, is a positive externality because it benefits society as a whole. Governments provide and subsidize education to ensure that everyone has access to it. What are what can be externalities of solution? So in terms of negative externalities, okay, the government can penalize the person or a firm who produces a negative externalities by charging penalties, fees, and taxes. Also, government encourages the person or firm who produces positive externalities by subsidize their activities. Governments also step in when there's imperfect information or monopoly power, ensuring markets function more fairly and efficiently. In healthcare, imperfect information can lead to poor decision making by consumers. Government intervention through regulations and public health programs helps ensure that people receive accurate information and necessary care. In some, governments use public finance to provide essential services like education, healthcare, and infrastructures, which are crucial for a well-functioning society. So we can make some examples for either negative externality or positive externality, okay? And then we can create some solutions, toward the kind of externalities. Okay, we want to talk about public goods, characteristics of public goods. Public goods are non-excludable and non-rival. This means that one person's use of the good does not reduce its availability to others, and it is difficult to exclude anyone from using it. Public goods are characterized by non-exclusive, non-excludability, and non-rivalry. Privatization is pursued for various reasons, including efficiency in production and supply. We will debate the pros and cons of privatization and its impact on public services. Okay, we learned three E's earlier: efficiency, economics, the stabilization, and equity. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, or during the COVID-19 pandemic, government sought to uh, stabilize the macroeconomy to prevent high unemployment, control inflation that could erode purchasing power and distort the financial market, and improve the prospects for economic growth and higher quality of life. Modern democracies accept the principle that they should attempt to mitigate the depth of downturns to prevent high rates of price increase and to make prospects for growth better. All right. The scenario here is inspired by pitches that entrepreneurs often make to investors. They have identified a problem and responded by inventing a solution that they can market for a profit. Suppose someone has identified the presence of mosquitoes as a problem for which they developed a solution: an anti-mosquito repellent fog to be diffused along city streets. Mosquitoes and their bites are not just an annoyance, but an important public health problem, especially for those who may become infected with the Zika virus. Can the private sector solve this problem using the fog? Some students may recognize that cities provide this service. In fact, in some regions, there are special districts dedicated to mosquito abatement, all of which are public sector entities funded through taxation. The reason cities provide this service is because a door-to-door salesperson is unlikely to attract many customers that will receive the service for free if their neighbor pays for the service. If one neighbor can anticipate that the other will not pay, such as in a game theoretic scenario, then no one will pay, even though the neighborhood will be better off with the service. This slide also introduces the key criteria for public goods. If I walk through a neighborhood treated for mosquitoes, I am automatically protected even if I don't already live there. It is also not feasible for the neighborhood to somehow exclude me from benefiting from the service. If the mosquitoes are absent due to the fog, they cannot or will not come back to bite someone who has not paid for the service. The presence of free riders is the key reason that the private sector would fail to recoup its costs, much less make a profit, in a futile attempt to sell public goods as its business model. Because problems of a public nature exist that cannot profitably be solved by the private sector, the public sector must collect revenue from taxpayers on a mandatory basis. This concept justifies study of taxation and public expenditure, which is the basis for much of the focus of the textbook. Certain goods are hybrids of pure public and private goods. For examples, for example, the private sector produces some goods with certain public good qualities, such as radio broadcasts that are non-rival and non-excludable in consumption, or streaming services that are non-rival in consumption but excludable. Common pool resources are those that are rival in consumption and are therefore regulated by the public sector to prevent depletion. For example, hunting and licenses are issued to prevent depletion of the species, with penalties issued for overconsumption of the good. Now, I want to discuss the privatization in public sector and why the public sector needs concept of privatization and what the pros and cons are. Privatization involves transferring the provision of services from the public sector to the private sector. It's often pursued to increase efficiency, reduce costs, and improve service quality. So we better remember these pros and cons of privatizations. And many governments have downsized the public sector to achieve efficiency in the belief that market provisions may offer more service options to the public, more flexibility in service response, and lower operating costs. Another example, water supply. Privatizing water supply and transportation services can lead to more efficient operations and better customer service. However, it is important to consider the implications such as the potential loss of public control and the impact on service accessibility and affordability. Privatization must be carefully managed to balance efficiency gains with the public interest. Without fiscal sustainability, an organization cannot survive anymore. Therefore, financial sustainability is crucial for the long-term health of an economy. It involves managing resources efficiently to avoid excessive deficits and ensuring that spending is aligned with the revenue. In other words, it is important to aim to have balanced budgets. It is avoiding excessive deficits and debt accumulation. Strategies for financial sustainability include maintaining balanced budgets, investing in green and sustainable projects, and ensuring infrastructure is well maintained. By focusing on financial sustainability, governments can promote stable economic growth and provide essential services without compromising future generations' ability to meet their needs. We will examine examples of financial sustainability in public finance and discuss its importance for long-term economic health. We'd better study this example carefully. Even now, there are very few case studies like this published in public administration journals. If students studying in Jackson do not investigate this, then who will? Another major rationale for public sector taxation and spending is to moderate business cycles in the economy. Something to emphasize is that this type of activity is only pursued at the national level. The most recent and prominent example of the federal government taking an active role in softening the blow of recessions is the CARES Act. which sought to replace some extent of economic activity lost due to the closure of certain sectors of the economy. Without the legislation, the existing social safety net programs would have likely been stretched thin. This legislation sought to produce immediate relief to those directly affected by pandemic-related closures. Let's have another break for 5 minutes.